You ready, Barb? All right, the committee will come to order. Will you please take roll call? Here. Here.
Representative Harshman. Vice Chairman Knapp.
Here.
Representative Newsom. Here. Representative Ottman.
Here.
Representative Wiley.
Here.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Chairman Olson. Thank you.
All right, welcome to the vast number of visitors we have today. We will start with Senate File 75. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So today, I'm going to be bringing you two Select Committee on Blockchain bills. The first one is Senate File 75. This is Decentralized Autonomous Organizations Amendments, and this is a really short bill, really straightforward bill. So a few sessions back, we created the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, that's the DAO, supplement in statute. So we allowed for the creation of a limited liability company in the form of a DAO. Since we created it, we have, I believe this will be the second time we've come back with amendments. The first time we returned with amendments, it was pretty significant. We were still adopting the law and really getting it right. This one is really quite short, but what it is in response to some issues that the Secretary of State's office has had. So there's a little bit of a background here. When you create a decentralized autonomous organization, the statute requires you in your articles of organization when you create the company to list a public identifier. And so you have, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, Article 4, whatever article it is. Article 7 has to list your public identifier. And so this is some type of pointer or source that shows basically what your smart contract is and where it's at. The Secretary of State's office has battled with that with industry a little bit in terms of what exactly is meant by the public identifier. In our minds, when we created the statute originally, we thought it'll be basically a URL. It'll be a website address, and that'll be there, and someone can click on it and go to the smart contract. There were DAOs that were filed that didn't have public identifiers. Secretary of State we had to deal with whether the Secretary of State's office had authority to administratively dissolve those. We've gone through that. You have to have one. Now the next step is, okay, what exactly does it actually mean? Because it can look different. So that's what this bill does. This bill answers the what does it mean portion of a public identifier. If you turn to page 2, at the top of page 2, we are just simply inserting into statute a definition of publicly available identifier. And it means an address that is available publicly. So that means anyone can access it. That it identifies a smart contract. So again, referencing back, that was the whole purpose of this, that it would point to the smart contract of the DAO. And it may include a uniform resource locator. That's the URL, that's the website address, or contract address, or other similar reference. So that's the main thing this bill does, clarifies that for the Secretary of State's office. Under the previous administration of the Secretary of State's office, we worked with them over the interim. They brought this problem to us. We worked on a solution together. I'm sure you'll hear from the current Secretary of State's office, but just know that we worked through this with the previous administration on trying to solve this problem for them. And then the second thing this bill does, 17-31107, amendment or restatement of articles of organization. It specifies that the articles of organization for your DAO must be amended if you go down to lines 18 through 19, new language here, everything above that's existing language. The publicly available identifier has changed. So if you change your publicly available identifier, you have to file an amendment to your articles. That makes sense because we're actually requiring it to be physically in your articles. And this bill goes into effect on July 1st, 2023. I'll take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. Can you give me an example of how this works and where it says, because this is all new, I know that you've been working extensively with it for a couple years. When it says that it can be this identifier or may include a uniform resource locator or similar reference. If I was wanting to look up to find out about this smart contractor, this whatever, if it's a couple different things, how would I know how to look? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to punt that question over to Representative Yin. I can articulate the uniform resource locator really well. I think he can articulate the other even better than I could.
Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Uniform Resource Lake Locator is a URL. I mean, that's what URL stands for, Uniform Resource Locator. So that would be just something you type in a web browser, and it should bring up a web page that refers to the smart contract. The other contract address or another similar reference, so that usually is talking about an address in the blockchain somewhere. So you could use, there are browsers that you can browse a blockchain, and that address should be able to point you to where in the blockchain that smart contract is, so you can actually look it up. Or the Secretary of State's office could look it up, or anyone who looks at the filing would be able to look it up. So that's the intent of the publicly available identifier, so someone can actually go and find it, and that there's that transparency there.
Any follow-up to that? Representative? Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we will go to the agency, Secretary of State's office. Welcome. Please state your name for the record. And we have online too, okay?
I'm here. Thank you.
Secretary Gray, welcome.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead with your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pretty quick on this one. That was a good change, clarifying the definition of publicly available identifier and also saying that when a publicly available identifier is changed, an amendment to the Articles of Organization needs to be filed. So we stand in support of this bill, and these two clarifications in the statute are positive steps. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the Secretary? None? Okay. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to this bill from the public? Anyone online? Okay. What is the pleasure of the committee? It's been moved by Representative Harshman, seconded by Representative Yin. Discussion. Question having been called, would you please take a roll? This is voting on Senate File 75.
Representative Chadwick? Aye. Representative Haroldson?
Aye.
Representative Harshman? Aye. Chairman Knapp?
Aye.
Representative Newsom? Aye. Representative Ottman? Representative Wiley? Representative Yin? Chairman Olson?
Aye.
9 ayes. Do pass with amendments, correct?
Yes.
We're not,
Oh,
do I need to turn those in? Because we didn't.
no amendments. Yeah. So Senate File 75 has passed committee. That was moved by Representative Harshman and seconded by Representative Yin. Okay, moving on to Senate File 76 engrossed, if you want to go ahead and explain the bill.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So Senate File 76 is a little more lengthy in terms of the substance that we're going to have to go through, but in terms of what it is, it's actually pretty simple, pretty straightforward. from the, you know, the 10,000-foot view, all we're doing is creating a repository or a system where you can register your digital asset. So this bill, this law is mimicked off of Wyoming's trademark law. So just be thinking, you know, think in your mind what we're talking about is something very similar to a trademark or a copyright. If I own some type of property, in this case, we're talking about intellectual property. If I own intellectual property, I might want to protect it. And so the ways that I can protect my property is I might get a patent, I might get a trademark, I might get a copyright. Those are the ways that I can protect my property. So this creates a digital asset registration. And the reason behind that is because the Patent and Trademark Office at the federal level has openly declared that you cannot copyright a digital asset. So because you can't, Wyoming is offering a solution. The solution is the Wyoming Digital Asset Registration Act. So real quick, and I'll probably say this again, but why you might want to do this, there's really three reasons. Number one, because you can't do it at the federal level, so you're going to want to do it in Wyoming if you have a digital asset. Number two, because it's going to give you access to all of Wyoming's laws. You're going to avail yourself of all of Wyoming's blockchain and digital asset laws, the culmination of dozens of bills over the last few years. And then the third reason is the Chancery Court. So because we have a Chancery Court in Wyoming, and you're deciding whether to domicile in Wyoming or move to Wyoming, and you have digital assets that you want to register, here's your third reason. Wyoming has a Chancery Court, and I want to be able to avail myself of that court and its process, so I will register here in Wyoming. Those are really the three reasons why you'd want to do it. With that, I'll go ahead and walk you through the bill. Page 1, bottom of the page. I hope you all have the blue version, the engrossed version. Creates a new statute, all new law. You turn that over. First is just simple definitions. Secretary means Secretary of State. Okay, so 3429-202 registered digital asset. So the lawful owner of any digital asset or the lawful owner's agent may register the digital asset with the Secretary. So the Secretary of State's office is the office that would be overseeing this repository in accordance with this article. So key there is it can just be the owner or the agent, and they may register an asset. Subsection B is the certificate. It's just directing the Secretary of State's office that upon approval of an application, the Secretary shall provide a registration certificate cryptographically signed by the Secretary for each registered digital asset. Takes us over to page 3, bottom of or middle of page 3, creation of the new statute 3429-203, application. So here's the contents of the application. The application shall contain the following, bottom of page 3. Number 1, obviously the name and address of the person applying. Number 2, the nature of the digital asset. So what is it? And sufficient information to identify your digital asset. Over to page 4. The application must contain a statement that the applicant is in fact the lawful owner. This is one of the reasons why you might do it. So why you might register your asset, because you want the world to know that you own this digital asset. Number 4, cryptographic or proof, or just proof that the lawful owner has control of the digital asset. And then the application shall be signed and verified under oath. Bottom of the page, there's a fee, $300. If you want to register your digital asset, your application must contain a $300 fee paid to the Secretary of State's office. Bottom of the page, the applicant shall be. Okay, so we place some qualifications on who the applicant must be. Can't just be any person. Page 5, top of page 5, the person must be a resident of the state of Wyoming. Okay, and they must, or if they're a company, they must incorporate or be organized in the state of Wyoming. So I'll stop here for a minute to talk about this. The idea has always been behind every bill that the Select Committee on Blockchain has pushed forward is to bring people to Wyoming. In the beginning, when we created legislation, we weren't as aggressive with that. So there are some laws that you can avail yourself a lot easier than others. But towards the back end of the work on that committee in the last I'd say 2 out of the last 5 years, we've been a lot more aggressive on saying, no, we want you here. So this law is being very aggressive. You have to be a resident. We want you to move here, or we want you to move your company here. Okay, page 5. 34-29-204 examination of application. So this is if the application is not automatically accepted by the Secretary of State's office, then the Secretary of State may do the following. They can request additional information, and then they have to give sufficient time for the applicant to remedy that additional information that was needed. Page 6, the Secretary may revise the application with agreement of the applicant. The Secretary, if the applicant is found not to meet the registration requirements, the Secretary shall advise the applicant of the reasons and then give them time to cure. Bottom of page 6, creation of the statute 34-29-205. This is the term of registration. If I register my asset in Wyoming, I'm registering it for 5 years. That's the term. Page 7 talks about renewal of my registration. So 6 months before my registration is up, so I'm at 4.5 years, I can apply for a renewal of my registration, and I get an additional 5 years. So each term is 5 years. And every 4.5 years, I'm going to have to go and take an affirmative action to re-register my asset if I want it to still be registered in Wyoming. My initial fee was $300. Remember that. My renewal fee is $150. So every 4.5 years, I'm going to pay $150. Clarifies here in the middle of the page that a digital asset may be renewed for successive periods of 5 years. So there's no limitation. You know, it's not like you just get 10 years. You can do this in perpetuity every 5 years. Secretary of State has to keep for public examination a record of all registered digital assets. That seems obvious. 34-29-207, the cancellation of registration. So when can you cancel? Going over to page 8, I can voluntarily cancel my registration. I can say, nope, I don't want it to be on the Wyoming registry anymore. I pay a fee. It's up to $30. It cannot exceed $30, and I cancel my registration. Next, if it's not renewed. So 4 years, 6 months passes. It's now 4 years, 7 months, and I didn't file for a renewal, and the registration that was renewed will cancel automatically. And then the third category of cancellation is really just court order. So if a court orders the cancellation, and a court can do so. That's the following language on page 8. Page 9. There's one more. Sorry, there's one more category of cancellation. Here is if it was unlawful or improper transfer of the asset. So I am a Wyoming resident. I register my asset and I transfer it to John Smith, who is not a Wyoming resident. Obviously, it's not meeting the qualifications of a registered asset because the owner had to be a Wyoming resident. That's gonna automatically result in a cancellation of the registration. Or a change in ownership of a registered digital asset among persons qualified shall not alone result in the cancellation. Okay, because they have that right to cure. Maybe we want them to move to Wyoming. 34-29-208, false or fraudulent representation. So when if I file a false or fraudulent representation, then I am liable to pay all damages sustained in consequence of the filing of that registration, to be recovered by or on behalf of the injured party in any court of competent jurisdiction. Flip that over to page 10. Promulgation rulemaking authority. That's the end of section 1. So that's all the new statute that we're creating. Section 2 is just the Chancery Court. So the bottom of the page of page 10, that's existing language. You turn it over, page 11, we're adding the language on lines 6 through 7, a dispute concerning a digital asset. So remember that the Chancery Court has jurisdiction that is statutorily defined. So you have to fit in the categories that we list in statute. We're just adding a dispute concerning a digital asset registered under these statutes. And it has to be more than $50,000 in value. Section 3 is rulemaking authority. And then section 4 is why you have a blue bill. instead of a white bill. This is what was added by the Senate. The Senate added a one-time appropriation, it looks like, of $270,000 from the general fund. That was not in the original bill. I'm going to assume that what happened is, and our Secretary of State's office can speak to this more specifically, that we had I looked at the fiscal note, it was still indeterminate, but I'm gonna guess that we have some type of fiscal understanding of what it's gonna take to prop up the system. We're guessing that's probably $250,000 to prop up the new registry, and that's the $270,000. And that is the end of the bill. Mr. Vice Chairman, thank you for allowing me to explain that bill.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Newsom.
So this appears to be similar to copyright and trademark law. Is there a national registry? I know you can, with trademark, or you can register nationwide. Or is this a state-by-state basis? And are there other states that have this process for digital assets?
Chairman Olson.
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Newsom, all great questions. So, for like a trademark, as an example, you can have a state trademark in any of the 50 states, and you can also have a federal trademark. There is no federal registration. So there is no place that you can federally register. In fact, it's the opposite, because the United States Patent Office has specifically said that you cannot copyright a digital asset. So we have guidance from the federal level saying the opposite, that you can't even copyright it. To my knowledge, unless something has happened since we met during the interim, there is no other state that has a registration act, because we would have looked to those other states in building our language, and we didn't. Instead, we looked at Wyoming's trademark laws, and we just said, our direction to LSO was, we have statutes that allow you to have a trademark in the state of Wyoming. Let's build our system very similar to what that looks like, and let's call it a registration repository. So hopefully that answers your question.
Follow up? Any other questions? I had one kind of relating that, just trying to follow along. On page 4, lines 8 through 10, the cryptographic proof that the lawful owner has control of the digital asset at the time of application. Where does that come from? How do you accomplish that?
Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
He's our technologist on the
Yeah.
committee.
The cryptographic proof is kind of hard for me to lay out in a committee meeting without like a session on how you prove mathematically that something that you've signed with the cryptographic key, which is something that we had a previous bill on, is the one that you can prove that proof comes from the signing from that key. It's a mathematical proof. We can do a primer on it at some point if the committee would like, but I think it would be very difficult for me to try to lay out right here. But essentially, it's saying that someone with a key is proved to own that current digital asset.
Okay, and we talked about the key before, so I think I understand the explanation. But if you're not required to show that key to anybody or give that information, how do you truly justify that that's owned?
So, Mr. Chairman, using that key, you can generate a signature on the fly where that signature proves that the public version of that, so there's a public version of the key and the private version of the key. The public version you can give away easily. The private version is what you can sign that you can decode with the public version to prove that that you own the private version of that key. And then you can use that to match up with the cryptographic proof linked to the digital asset.
Thank you, Representative.
And Mr. Vice Chairman, I would also add that if that other bill were to go into law, the private disclosure of cryptographic keys, I would say that this is an exception to that, because if you want to register, you have to provide the key in order to prove your asset that you have control of it. So that would be an exception. You would if you were that nervous about disclosing your key, then you wouldn't apply for this. You just wouldn't do that.
Any other questions? I had one more on page 6. just a question if this just follows our trademark law, the 5-year period, is that just similar to what we do for state trademark laws? They re-up them?
Mr. Vice Chairman, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure that you have to re-up it every 5 years, but I'm not sure why we would have put it in here otherwise, so it
Okay.
must be actually.
Thank you.
I don't really deal in state trademark law, but my understanding was when we built this bill, we looked directly at Wyoming's trademark laws. So if that's where we look, that's probably what it says.
Okay, thank you. Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, so these repositories will be within the Secretary of State's office. Is that it?
Correct, yeah. Mr. Chairman, sorry, correct. Representative Ottman, the Secretary of State's office is going to keep the registration of the assets.
Okay. Follow up.
Yes, Representative.
And so we currently don't have any of this because we don't have it in place, the bills and also the equipment in the Secretary of State's office. Is that right?
Chairman Olson.
I don't know. The Secretary of State's office is going to have to answer for you any questions on what it's going to look like in their office. From my point of view, it probably seems too simple. It's an Excel spreadsheet that has NFT owned by ABC Smith, registered on January 1st, 2024. You know, I don't know what their system has to sophisticatedly look like. I think they'll be able to answer that.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Chairman Olson.
All right, thank you.
Let's have up next the Secretary's office. Secretary Gray, your comments on this, and then if you could also cover your proposed amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate it. For the record, I am Secretary of State Chuck Ray. And then also in the room, we have Joe Rubino, our General Counsel and Policy Director. To implement Senate File 76 as drafted, first of all, I want to go through what the bill does. It creates this procedure for the registration, renewal, or cancellation of a digital asset. And just want to do some 30,000 feet up review. I know Representative Olson went through it in quite some detail, but the bill also requires that the registration of the digital asset, if it's a business entity, that it be domiciled in Wyoming, and additional online search functionality need to be implemented to validate that requirement. And to be clear, that is a large source of the fiscal note. Just to lay out, in a moment, we'll lay out the full fiscal note. Also, in order to implement Senate File 76, the Secretary of State's office would need to create a new module in our WyoSuite system to allow for the registration, renewal, and cancellation of the asset. And the bill also requires a public list of all digital assets be registered. And I want to be clear here that that will be within our existing WyoSuite system. So it'll be a new module within the existing system. The bill as written also requires the Secretary of State's office to provide the registrant with a cryptographically signed certificate of registration, which would be unique to our processes. And there are two costs associated with providing this type of certificate, and that's on top of the domiciling in Wyoming component, confirming that, which is a large part of the fiscal note as well. But in terms of the certificate, the office would need to contract with the vendor for automated digital document signing certificate services to be utilized through an API. The exact cost of this service is unknown at this time, as the cost is variable depending on volume, but it would become an ongoing operational cost demanded if this bill were to become statute. Additionally, the WyoBiz website would need to be modified to allow for online registration of digital assets and to integrate with the vendor API for automated digital document signing. The cost of integration is currently unknown. Now, in terms of the estimate, the initial estimate of $248,400 did not include the likely $18,120 cost to modify the WyoSuite business module. That's the initial fiscal note that was provided by the office. We have since revised the fiscal impact to account for this cost and resubmitted this, and that led to the appropriation of $270,000 off our fiscal note. I want to note two things before we get into the amendment that I think are very important. One, I have talked with a number of individuals on this, and there is a large amount of skepticism on the demand for this. And I want to provide a little history. There was a lot of talk when we did Series LCs and DAOs that this was going to be a large bonanza, and that really has not played out. The DAO bill has brought in about $60,000 in initial filing fees. In terms of renewals, we haven't done that calculation, but I just want to be clear. I mean, in the past, some of these efforts, while not entirely the same, have not played out to be the bonanza that maybe was initially pitched when the bill was brought out there. So I just want to be clear on that now. And I've talked with individuals just anecdotally, and there is some skepticism about the demand for this. There are a few that disagree, but I'd say it's about 70% of those that I've talked to. The other thing that I want to be clear on is this is very separate from efforts that have been proposed in the past to move our business filing systems to the blockchain. And I want to be clear that this is a very separate system. It's a separate effort, and that is a separate discussion. And I want to be very clear about that on this bill, because there's some concern within the office and, in light of the history on some of those discussions on this bill. In terms of the amendment, this is in response to a couple of Senate amendments that were brought on the floor that initiated some discussion within our office. I'm going to turn it over to our General Counsel Policy Director, Mr. Rubino, who has really been digging into this with the lead in our tech division on just some clarification on the wording there.
Thank you, Secretary. Before we do, any questions yet for Secretary Gray on his comments? Okay. Mr. Urbino?
Thank you, Vice Chairman Knapp. Joe Rubino, I'm the General Counsel Policy Director for the Wyoming Secretary of State. So I'd just like to speak a little bit to the amendments broadly that were adopted by the Senate. Chairman Olson brought up the appropriation, which was one of the most material ones. While many have no practical effect on Senate File 76's implementation by our office, the amendments which were made to Wyoming Statute 3429-207 affect our office's ability to implement this legislation. So specifically, I'll turn your attention to Romanet 5 on page 9, and that's lines 1 through 3 on page 9. So if you go back to the bottom of page 7, it begins on line 20 under 3429-207. Subsection A, a digital asset shall no longer be deemed registered, and then this is the operative text, and the secretary shall cancel from the register, Romanet 5, any registration when ownership of the digital asset is transferred to a person who is not qualified to be an applicant pursuant to Wyoming Statute 3429-203D. The concern that we had with our tech division when we were reviewing this is that the implementation of this would not be feasible by our office, specifically that the secretary shall cancel automatically upon a transfer of ownership to a person who is not qualified. The reason is that it's not feasible for the Secretary of State to determine whether or not upon a transfer of ownership, the person or entity is not qualified. That was not contemplated in the original bill. The engrossed version includes Romanet 5 as an amendment. And so that was something that we flagged that it wasn't in there, and that's why it was not brought up in front of the Corporations Committee in the Senate as an issue. Our proposed amendment really tracks the language. So if you delete Romanet 5, I think that would be the cleanest way. So lines 1 through 3, and then insert a new subsection B, which tracks the language of subsection A. A digital asset shall no longer be deemed registered when ownership of the digital asset is transferred to a person who is not qualified to be an applicant pursuant to Wyoming Statute 3429-203D. So again, the concern was that it would be impossible and not feasible to implement the legislation as it was amended. I'd just like to speak a little bit about our office, and really this plays out in the text of the bill itself. But broadly, our office is an office of record. So we're a filing office. That's where applicants come, and whether or not it's for a corporation or any other corporate entity, they file with us. They attest to whether or not they meet the qualifications to do this. That's also what appears in this. The other Romanettes that were originally in the bill, automatic cancellation by the secretary upon a voluntary request, upon non-renewal, or a court order, those were sort of the three buckets. Those made sense because those weren't determined by our office automatically. And it was just different. This is different because it requires our office to monitor something that really we do not keep track of and we cannot keep track of, which is the transfer of ownership. So I hope that clears that up a little bit. And then now, page 9, line 5, really what it does is it just, since we're creating a new subsection, which makes sense, then that would move that B to subsection C. So with that, I'll be happy to stand for any questions on our amendment.
Okay, questions from the committee for Mr. Rubino? None? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, did you have anything to add before we move on?
Mr. Chairman, the one, I was just going through my notes, appreciate that, give me one more opportunity. I just want to lay out the break-even point. Just off initial filings would be 300. Obviously, there would be renewals, but there's also an ongoing cost. So if you were to just calculate it off of initial filings, if we went with the max point, it would be 900 because the max point would be 300 on the filing fee. So it'd be 900 filings. Anyway, I just wanted to make note of that. Thank you.
I had one question. So I'm trying to understand this. Do you feel like that these digital assets coincide with companies registering for blockchain within Wyoming, or do you view these as what would be separate filings?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that NFTs the thought is that they would use this system. When I was talking with Senator Rothfuss on it, I see Mr. Lindholm in the room. Maybe he wants to weigh in. But a lot of folks I've talked to are puzzled as to who would utilize this, at least at the scale that that maybe is envisioned by the bill. I mean, that chancery court, the thought is, well, you get access to that chancery court, but that chancery court really doesn't have any standing precedent. And I guess the response back would be, what does have standing precedent in this area? And but I've heard a lot of folks that are skeptical on this.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this in the room? Go ahead and identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Tyler Lindholm, not representing anyone besides myself. And I just wanted to touch base on a couple things. I heard cryptographically signed being questioned earlier, and good Representative Yin is a technologist through and through. He doesn't talk cowboy, so let me talk cowboy for you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, what we're talking about here, and typically what you see in cryptographically signed transactions, those types of things, thereby proving your assets. If you could, for instance, just imagine moving an amount of money from one of your checking accounts to another one of your checking accounts. That's a proof of transaction. In this situation, we're talking about 2 digital asset wallets. And that is typically in these DAO type situations how that's justified. And then, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, something I wanted to talk about, and Secretary of State Gray brought up a really good point. Who's going to use this and how popular could it be? I would bring up 1977. 1977, the Wyoming legislature invented LLCs, and they were a dud, a zero, a nothing until the mid-90s. And then all of a sudden, Wyoming, the Secretary of State Gray's office brings in about $50 million every 2 years based on that whim in 1977. And so, while I certainly agree, I don't know if this is going to work. I really don't. I don't have a crystal ball. But, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if it's a couple $100,000 to get her spun up and try it and see if it might be something that catches on, the Secretary of State's office, because of that action in 1977, is one of the only agencies that has a return on investment to the state of Wyoming. Full stop. It's a moneymaker for us, and it's voluntary. There's nobody mandating anybody. There's nobody pushing anyone into a corner on this. It's voluntary. The only thing I would question about the legislation, and maybe I know Chairman Olson also chairs the Blockchain Select Committee, is the mandate that you have to be a business in Wyoming. Is that necessary? I don't know, and I would love to hear some conversation around that. If it's not mandatory that you're a business in Wyoming and you still want to send a check to the state of Wyoming, right on. And that'd be it for me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And so similar to LLCs in the past, that's your premise is why the state residency.
Mr. Chairman, and members, yeah, absolutely. I think, we have foreign LLCs now that register, organizations in Florida register their business in the state of Wyoming because Wyoming's privacy laws around corporations are fantastic. And so that situation might be this situation 10 years from now. I don't know. But I would say keep yourselves open to these options. If it's a small spend to be able to see if something could work and could be a future return on investment for the state of Wyoming, that's pretty cool.
If you have 900 NFTs that you could register for us, that would be a great start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Mr. Lindholm from the committee? None? Okay, thank you. Any other members of the public that wish to testify on this bill? No, I will close public testimony then. What is the pleasure of the committee? Moved by Representative Yin, seconded by Representative Wiley. Let's go through the bill. Page 1, are there any changes? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4, any changes? Page 5?
Yeah, Mr. Vice Chairman. On page 5, I would like to strike, I would move to strike lines 1 through 5. On page 5, on page 4, let me see if that lines up. Actually, it'd be page 4, line 22, page 5, lines 1 through 5.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Olson. And can you go ahead and explain your amendment?
If there's a second.
Oh, sorry. Seconded by Representative Harshman.
So when we're talking, what we're doing is removing the requirement that you be a resident or be incorporated in Wyoming. And the more that I think about this, if one of the reasons why you want to register your asset in Wyoming is to avail yourself of the jurisdiction of it, so in other words, to avail yourself of the existing blockchain laws and avail yourself of the Chancery Court, if you simply just moved to the state, you would already have that as a benefit. So you wouldn't actually need to register your asset. So it doesn't, I think it doesn't accomplish that goal for residents because you're gonna move here, the court's gonna have jurisdiction over you, and you're not gonna have a desire to register your asset. So if we want 900 NFTs to get registered, I think we need to open ourselves up to a bigger world. This, I talked about kind of the move within the within the committee to move towards more of a protectionist stance on our laws. And this was a debate we had in our committee, but certainly would like to see the registrations. And so I do think opening that up is the best way to do that.
Okay. Any comments on that amendment? Representative Ottman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Olson, or Chairman Olson, one of the things I remember about when these were coming about was that these people will be in Wyoming. So we don't, so the possibility of nefarious stuff, we'll see it. On page 4, it says, an applicant is the lawful owner or the digital asset or the lawful owner's agent. So when we're looking at residency and things, it's getting a little gray in my mind. If you could go over how that is going to work. It seems in the state we're being a little more careful. There's been bills on only national companies or not wanting different entities to be part of our buying our lands and all that. So there is a concern. Would this open us up to possibly those concerns, or if you could just go over that? Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think it'd be the same as our limited liability laws. Limited liability company doesn't require you to live, the limited liability company laws do not require you to be a resident of Wyoming in order to have a Wyoming LLC. So,
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I'm aware of that, but this is a whole new ball of wax. This is digital assets, more than that. So I'm not sure about the safety of it, I guess is what I'm wondering. And it may be a great idea, like was said in the 70s, but this has been, I know it's been worked on for about a year and a half. There is international interest. What is the safety mechanism if the owner doesn't have to be in the state, the agent doesn't have to be in the state? What is the mechanism for how would you find out if there was nefarious stuff? I mean, you guys are the experts on this, so I'm just asking for.
Chairman Olson.
yeah, Mr. Vice Chairman, I think you have to understand what kind of digital assets are being registered. And when we're talking about NFTs, we're talking about a GIF image of a basketball player dunking the ball. That's what we're talking about. So I don't know what nefariously could occur from registering that asset. Very different than actually the concern would exist greater with limited liability companies where there might be human traffic. It might be a human trafficking company, it might be a money laundering company, it might be a drug cartel who has an LLC. Those are the things that we worry about with an LLC. But with a digital asset, we're saying if you prove that you're the owner of it, you prove that you have control of it, then and you pay us $300, we'll put you on a list that says, yep, you're inside of this list. I don't know what the harm would be from that. I just don't know what the harm would be. So I can't think that we're opening ourselves up to nefarious activity. When we wrote the bill and included the residency requirement on it, it wasn't because we were worried about nefarious activity. It was that we want them to come to Wyoming was the purpose behind it. Well, we still want that. The hope is that they still will, but I'd also rather I think if the concern is fiscally, whether this is going to work or not, it's something that you can scale back. You can open this up right now to the world, and then you can come back a year from now and say that you want them to be residents. If you start in the reverse and it flops, I think you just have a different animal to deal with.
Okay. Any other comment? Okay. All those in favor of the motion for the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, that amendment carries. And I think we're on anything else on page 5? Okay, page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9.
On page 9, given the last amendment, I would say that we would need to just delete lines 1 through 3, because there would not be an instance in which the ownership would transfer to a person not qualified. Because every person would be qualified.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second it, but I would like to offer a friendly amendment to that, if possible. So I think it should be lines 1 through 8, because 8 is also talking about transfer of ownership, not being alone a reason of cancellation, but given that we deleted subsection D altogether, it doesn't make sense for all of that language to exist. So, if that's friendly.
What if it were ownership within the state that the transfer took place and that you did have a change of ownership? Doesn't matter if it was in state, out of state. Does that still remain a cause?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I don't think that alone is a cause for a cancellation of the registration. Even before any of the amendments, the transfer of ownership by itself wasn't a reason for an automatic cancellation.
Okay. All right, so does everybody understand the,
I do understand it, but I don't think you need to delete lines 5 through 8.
I don't either.
I think you want to leave it there because you want to make it clear that all it's saying is if John Smith transfers to John Doe, that alone, we're just being very clear that alone doesn't automatically prompt a cancellation. That had nothing to do with residency, I don't think.
So, Mr. Chairman, 3429-203D is what we deleted. So if we don't need to delete those lines, we still need to amend these lines to have some intent. That was on page 4, line 22 was the D.
Yeah, we can amend that language to say something like a change in ownership of a registered digital asset among persons qualified to be an applicant under this act shall not alone result in a cancellation of the registration. That's probably more of a conforming amendment to the previous amendment.
Would you be okay with that, Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, I'm fine, but D was literally the only qualification, so everyone is qualified essentially. So like I said, I
Okay.
think that's fine. I don't think it
Yeah,
does
I'll just I'll withdraw. I'll stick with the original amendment to delete
Okay.
it. That's fine.
Let's, who had the original amendment, by the way?
It was moved by Representative Newsom.
Actually,
yeah.
I did,
Okay, and can you just one more time clarify that for everybody?
I originally amended to delete lines 1 through 3, and then Representative Yin made a friendly amendment to that amendment to include lines 1 through 8.
And can we handle that as one amendment? Would you be,
That would be good.
and as a
yeah.
second concurrent with that? Okay, so that's deleting lines 1 through 8.
On page 9.
Okay, all those in favor of that amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Okay, that amendment carries. We're still on page 9. Any other amendments? Page 10, page 11, and page 12.
Actually, I was going to jump back, Mr. Chairman, to page 4.
All right, page 4, everyone.
On page 4, line 19, I would adjust the filing fee from $300 to $500. And that, if I get a second on that. So if you bump it to $500, you almost cut the 900 registrations in half. That you would your breaking point would be 540, I believe. So I think that helps with the fiscal note. Again, when the bill was developed, we didn't have an appropriation in it. So I can't remember much conversation at all on 300 other than we didn't want We didn't want it to be a deterrent, but I don't think $500 is a deterrent.
Chairman Olson, do you happen to know what the fee is for trademark registration? Does anybody?
I do not.
I see the point of the amendment. I just don't want to dissuade people from registering, but
I think Representative Yan is looking it up as we speak.
Mr. Chairman, I think it varies depending on the type of intellectual property, somewhere between 250 to 750.
so we are in that range anyway. Okay, so the amendment is changing the fee from $300 to $500. All those in favor of that amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Amendment carries. Chairman Olson was the first, and I believe Representative Harshman was the second. Okay. So we ended on 12. Is there any other amendments for the bill?
Yeah, so just to make it congruent, then on page 7, line 7, the renewal fee should be, instead of $150, it should be $250.
Okay, so we have an amendment on the renewal fee. Do we have a second? Representative Harshman for the second. All those in favor of that amendment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. That amendment carries. Are there any other amendments for the bill? Question being called. All those in favor of approving Senate File 76 as amended, will you please take the roll?
Representative Chadwick. Representative Haroldson. Representative Harshman. Chairman Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Newsom.
Aye.
Representative Ottman. Representative Wiley.
Aye.
Representative Yin. Chairman Olson.
Aye.
9 aye.
With the
Pass with amendments.
9-0 vote, the bill does pass with amendments.
Something tells me I'll be floor managing this one.
So, okay, is there any other business to come before the committee? Seeing none, committee is adjourned.
Ladies, thank you.